They've made a mistake and shown up at the wrong talk for the wrong date. About this slide, I'll clarify, I promise. So first of all, welcome everybody to the VTCRI Distinguished Public Lecture Series, named after Eric Schulman in his honor. This is just a reminder for those of you who were last week. That was last week's speaker, Greg Burns, who talked about the dog mind and brain, who's doing fascinating work on functional imaging of the dog brain. And I just point out on the bottom there that Time Magazine had quite a nice story yesterday or day before about this work that's going on. It was very auspicious in terms of the timing after Greg visiting here. For those of you who are interested, you might want to check out Time Magazine in that regard. Secondly, I want to announce the final upcoming talks in this series of the year. Next week, I think it is, we'll be having Dr. Leonard be here from the NIH speaking about human immunodeficiency from genes to new therapeutics. And then after that, the final speaker of the series will be Josh Gordon, the new director of the National Institute of Mental Health, who will be speaking about new advances in understanding psychiatric disorders. So hopefully many of you will be able to come to one or two of those remaining talks in the series. We appreciate everybody being there. So I am going to take a couple minutes here. I promise I'll be brief to introduce today's speaker. It is truly a great honor to have Dr. David Skorton here, the Secretary of the Smithsonian. Dr. Skorton actually has a number of friends and colleagues in the audience who he's worked with over the years, and they know his bio better than I do. But quickly, he did his undergraduate work in psychology, his medical degree at Northwestern. While in school there, he worked as a rhythm and blues musician to put himself through school in Chicago, and apparently made enough money doing that to get through school at a very good school. So he must have some real talents in that area, as I understand it. He then went on to do residency and fellowship in cardiology at UCLA. He is a cardiologist. And from there, he went on and joined the faculty at the University of Iowa and rose through the ranks, as they say. And I mean really rose through the ranks and became vice president for research and president of the University of Iowa, a role he served in for a number of years and had a great impact on that institution. He then went on to join Cornell University, where he's professor of medicine, pediatrics, and biomedical engineering, and became president of Cornell. And there he accomplished, in a not that long period of time, a number of really fantastic achievements, one of which some of you have probably heard a bit about was the development of the new Cornell campus on Roosevelt Island and in New York City that has already started and has classes and has a number of structures going up that are opening soon. And that is really a fascinating dynamic of a partnership with the city, university, other universities internationally, the business community, that shows the kind of things that Dr. Skorton is able to accomplish at a very high level, working with a variety of very important groups. In 2015, he became the 13th Secretary of the Smithsonian. I think many of you know the Smithsonian is a very big operation. I think, I don't know, a bunch of museums, I don't know how many, quite a lot. The National Zoo, Air and Space, and the list goes on. And those are under his administrative leadership. And it sounds like he's just the right person to deal with all that and the complexities related to that. Dr. Skorton has been recognized in many, many ways. He's a master of the American College of Cardiology, a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations, member of the National Academy of Medicine, formerly the Institute of Medicine, and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He's made numerous contributions in cardiology and echocardiography and analysis in that regard that the scientific and medical community, I think, can greatly appreciate. But I think more importantly is the impact that he's had on the world, on our understanding the role of universities and their partnerships with cities in terms of culture, the arts, and blending, the importance of blending the role of universities with the arts and culture and sciences together. And as we emerge into a world where technology continues to dominate more and more, for all of us, it's like a breath of fresh air as far as I'm concerned, to have somebody who is appreciated in the technology world for the scholarship, the contributions, and the deep understanding, but reaches across into the world of arts and the culture and the humanities, and is a leading light in teaching us as a society the importance of bringing those things together in education, in partnerships between cities, universities, the business community. And I think probably now more than ever, there's a great need for people who can show us the way in that regard. And indeed, Dr. Skorton is one of the truly great leaders of the country. And instead of going through a bunch of other accomplishments, I just can't end without mentioning that he accompanied Billy Joel on the flute in She's Always a Woman at Cornell concert, and has also accompanied Wynton Marsalis in jazz at the Lincoln Center. So he's a very accomplished man. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. David Skorton.
Well, let me straighten you out in a couple things that Mike said. First of all, about my brilliant career playing as an R&B musician in Chicago, you hate to bite the hand that feeds you. Mike brought me here, and it's a great pleasure to be here, as I'll cover more in a moment. I did three things to make the money to go through college. The number one source of funds was I borrowed from various places. It took me a couple decades to pay that off. Secondly, I sold shoes. Growing up in LA, we had a family shoe store, and I sold shoes. That's where I learned to lie. It's just another long story. And then thirdly, I did play in a band for all those years, and it is true that we made enough money to cover our drinks in those bars that we played in. We never ended up owing money at those nights. So, but I like that. And then one more thing about the Billy Joel concert, if my wife was here, she'd want me to tell you this. It was a college concert, number one, and I did accompany him on one song. Came back in the audience to sit near my wife and her girlfriends, and she says to me, honey, how was that to sit in with Billy Joel? And I says to her, honey, that was the best 4 minutes of my life. Well, it turns out that's the wrong thing to say to your wife. So she began to ask me questions, comparison to, say, our wedding night, those kind of things. So I've had a very checkered musical career, let's put it that way. And the killer is that all of those famous acts I sat in with lost my cell phone number because they never called me back to go on tour. But let's get back to why I'm really here. First of all, I want to thank Mike for a couple of things. You'll join me, I know, in the community and at this institution in thanking Mike for his leadership that's recognized very, very broadly and way beyond this geographic area for taking something that is Virginia Tech, incredibly venerable and well-respected institution, and adding this enormous piece as you have done. Congratulations, Mike, on all the things you're doing. It's fabulous. And I also want to thank Mike for giving me such a fabulous stay here. I'm embarrassed to admit it's my first time in Roanoke. It will definitely not be my last. It's a fabulous place in every way. I must tell you that the Virginia Tech family's resilience after the events of a decade ago are well known nationally, and the resiliency of the community is a light for all of us. I thank you on behalf of a lot of people across the country who think about Virginia Tech for a very long time as a very distinguished place of learning and inquiry, and also now think about it as a model of resiliency. So I did want to mention that to you. I got to say a couple things about the building that we're in. I'm not an architect or an expert on architecture, but I just love the building. I wanted to say something about that. Before coming here, the individual who does research for my speeches said that I should say something about Hokie Stone. And I didn't know what that was. I thought maybe it was a spelling error or something. But I understand that it's been part of the Virginia Tech campus since the 1800s. And then sure enough, Mike showed me a wall with Hokie Stone. And you have to admit I impressed you because I knew what it was. And the guy who taught me that is a guy named Dave Haddock, who puts the research together for these speeches. And so, but that'll be our little secret. You can just pretend that I knew that on my own. The way this building, in my eye, gives sort of a nod to the past, while in the sense of the Hokie Stone and a few other features, and yet is so cutting edge, is really something, and reminds me of the newest museum. It's your museum, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, is a very brand new, very highly technologically advanced museum, but also has features that are meant to look back as well. So the late historian John Hope Franklin, one of the driving forces behind the creation of that museum, said that a building could represent both tradition and hope for a better tomorrow. And as he noted, a generation which ignores history has no past and no future. And that building, like this building, blends the traditional with the cutting edge that embodies the truth that an appreciation of history helps society move forward, and I'm going to come back to that. Now, progress, as we know and as we're proud of as Americans, has been a hallmark of the human experience, and especially this country. By just any host of measures, human beings have made incredible gains over millennia in technology, agriculture, medicine, and in a very brief period of time, we've harnessed the power of the electron, the power of the atom, and we've peered out into the stars. We've cautiously dipped our toes into the galaxy. We've extended our longevity and maybe more importantly, improved the quality of life by expanding our knowledge, as you are doing, about life processes in health and disease, and by advancing technology in prevention and diagnosis and treatment. The outsized influence on our planet that scientists and scholars have caused, the outside influence of humans on our planet, have caused scholars to name our age the Anthropocene, the age of humans. And yet, as you know very well, for all the gains that we've made, in many ways, our progress has been painfully slow. War and violence are obviously still ubiquitous. Diseases that have long vexed us are still here, have no cures, and the combination of chronic non-communicable diseases and emerging infectious diseases present enormous ongoing challenges to all of us in the health professions. Poverty, including right in the city where I live and work, is still rampant. A new study in the Journal of the American Medical Association, the Internal Medicine Journal, found that the average lifespan in the United States varies by more than 20 years depending on the county in which you live. We have also seen the unintended consequences of progress in other ways in the modern world. Our footprint, carbon and otherwise, has often wrought devastating effects, from the depletion of natural resources to actions that have hastened and worsened climate change. Our shared ecosystem that we depend on and on which we are counting for our children and grandchildren have proven to be very fragile and much less robust than we realized. So as we face massive, complex, perhaps seemingly intractable problems, we very understandably turn to science and its offspring, technology, to chart the way forward. Can science save us? Well, I argue that it cannot, at least not alone, not without the assistance of the entire range of knowledge available to us. E.O. Wilson brought attention to this need in his book, Consilience, a term that he described as the linking of facts and fact-based theory across disciplines to create a common groundwork of explanation. In that landmark work, he also noted, a balanced perspective cannot be acquired by studying disciplines in pieces, but through pursuit of the consilience among them. I often think of bringing together disciplines in the context of education, in which many of us talk about curricular and experiential integration. But Wilson's point, I believe, holds true whether in academia or in the larger world. More than ever, we need to be using all the tools at our disposal to address the great challenges. And how unfortunate then that many of us still work too often in disciplinary isolation. In recent decades, scientists have been working in an increasingly collaborative way. Although we're working more and more in teams and borrowing richly from the scientific expertise in related fields and even unrelated fields, how often do scientists think to drink deeply of the wells of knowledge offered by the social sciences, the arts, and the humanities? Having spent, as Mike mentioned, much of my professional lifetime working in biomedical and engineering sciences and in clinical medicine for 30 years, I have great reverence for science and for the scientific method. But I firmly believe, and have been taught by a life in science and medicine, that science is not enough to solve the world's thorniest challenges. The arts and humanities and social sciences must work hand in hand with science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, the so-called STEM disciplines. It seems hard to believe now, But there was a time when the sciences were not distinct at all from the arts, when the social sciences were not distinct from medicine. During the Renaissance, people sought knowledge in all its forms. Da Vinci was, of course, the embodiment of this age. He was passionately curious about the world, an artistic genius, an accomplished scientist, and a skilled inventor. He deftly mastered architecture, mechanics, human anatomy, and painting. In 2013, the Smithsonian exhibited Da Vinci's Codex on the Flight of Birds, his illustrated journal that drew a line from his observations of birds to the mechanics of flight and another line to the potential of engineered human flight. And although Da Vinci was arguably the most prominent example of the Renaissance, we can look to many others throughout history who show that science and the humanities need not be separate and need not be at odds. Galileo, known as the father of physics and the father, perhaps, of the scientific method, had a resume that rivaled Da Vinci, astronomer, author, engineer, mathematician, physicist, and philosopher. The Smithsonian's Dibner Library of the History of Science and Technology in our National Museum of American History has a handwritten 1635 letter from Galileo. In it, he lauded an inventor's design for a water clock. He also pleaded with his friend to help him reduce his lifetime house arrest for heresy, for promoting the then dangerous idea that the earth revolves around the sun. It reminds us that there have always been those who feared the truth and blocked its pursuit, especially when it was in their interest to do so. We often hear about how the arts and humanities can complement science, but the opposite is true as well. Take the Baroque painter Johannes Vermeer, whose talent in creating photorealistic paintings 150 years before the advent of the camera was a mystery. In recent years, some have argued that Vermeer relied on the aid of an optical device using lenses made by another resident of Delft in the Netherlands, microbiologist and adept lens maker Antony van Leeuwenhoek. It is a controversial position among others, but given the fact that Vermeer did not have much known artistic training, and many of his paintings have a perspective unique to a camera lens and not human vision, well, at least it's plausible. The film Tim's Vermeer documents the path of a non-artist as he attempts to recreate Vermeer's painting, The Music Lesson, using only the materials that would have been available to Vermeer to create a lens that would reflect the image onto a canvas. And now in the 17th century, the late 17th century, the Age of Enlightenment swept a new wave of humanistic and scientific pursuits across Europe. Its prominent thinkers like Isaac Newton, John Locke, and Francis Bacon set the stage for modern liberal democracy. Carrying the torch of the Enlightenment to our own shores, the founders of the United States shared their Renaissance predecessors' thirst for all kinds of knowledge. George Washington himself had a keen interest in gardening and architecture, and his art collection led author and art historian Joseph Menke to call Washington the father of American art. Ben Franklin, as you know, was equal parts scientist, inventor, writer, and diplomat. Thomas Jefferson once called music the favorite passion of my soul, and he, Jefferson, devoted many hours to playing the violin. Now, the creative connections that bind the arts, humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences are still evident today. Michigan State University professor of physiology and MacArthur fellow Robert Root Bernstein made an interesting observation that confirms those connections. He found that Nobel laureates in the sciences are much more likely than their scientific colleagues to be involved in the arts and humanities. The Nobel laureates at least twice as likely to be musicians, at least 7 times as likely to be sculptors, and at least 12 times as likely to write poetry. But the key to fully unleashing the power of that creativity is to share with the general public the value of different spheres of knowledge. The arts and humanities have an intrinsic ability to connect on an emotional level so they can help communicate the importance of science and the scientific method. Now, back in the day, as they say, I used to give my medical students copies of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes as a book to study about medical diagnosis. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who you may know was a physician who studied at the University of Edinburgh, is said to have based the character of Sherlock Holmes on his surgery professor, Joseph Bell. Reading one Holmes story, The Hounds of the Baskervilles, might help the public understand what science is all about. Conan Doyle's description of a systematic approach to crime solving elucidates the principles of the scientific method, including its application to medical diagnosis. First, Holmes would observe something. Then, he would posit an explanation. Then he would gather information. If the information fit his posited explanation, then a step forward had been taken. If the data did not fit, he would revamp his hypothesis, as should all good investigators and clinicians. That is a terrific illustration, to my mind, of both the scientific method and medical diagnosis. Conan Doyle's works lay out the principles of both a compelling and clear way, embedded as they are in exciting mystery stories. Now, I think as scientists, we have to better explain how joyous is the process of scientific discovery, and also that science is a never-ending attempt to learn more and clarify our just recent understanding. That responsibility to explain the method falls squarely on our shoulders as scientists, and we need to share that method with all of our outreach and communication skills. Perhaps, if we could better convey how scientific investigation is self-correcting, marked both by healthy skepticism by the scientist herself and imagination, then perhaps the public would be more supportive and understanding of the frequent twists and turns we take along the road to scientific understanding. Now, a recent example of how the humanities can help illuminate the sciences is happening right now at this institution. The art show, Research in Abstract, features, as I understand, about 50 or so artists who work in a variety of media, paired up with medical research teams. The aim, as I understand it, is to use art to explain and promote scientific research. And some of you may actually have participated in this, as I understand that VTCRI was well represented in that exhibition. The Roble Lab, Smythe Lab, the Valdez Lab, among others. I noticed that one of the participants, Dr. Stephanie Robert, from, if I have this right, the Sondheimer Lab, was interviewed for a story by the Southwest Times, and she was quoted as saying, "One of the things that is an issue in the world today is the fact that science is so separate from the community, and there's just not a lot of integration between science and the public." I couldn't have said it better myself, and I applaud all of you who worked with the artists to help people understand the wonder and the value of science. Now, of course, the therapeutic value of music and art is well documented in the health sciences. Take, for example, the partnership between the National Endowment for the Arts and the Department of Defense that uses art as therapy to help veterans recover from traumatic brain injury. It has been so successful since its recent inception, just in 2011, that Congress appropriated nearly $2 million more to the NEA in 2016 specifically to expand this program. And in fiscal year 2017, the Department of Veterans Affairs joined in the expanded program now known as Creative Forces NEA Military Healing Arts Network. A new pilot program called Just Us at the National Gallery of Art uses paintings from the gallery's collection to help people who are coping with all too frequent cognitive impairments. Now, programs like these are invaluable for the help they give to people who obviously really need it. But more than that, these programs give researchers insight into how the brain works, how our emotional health is tied to our physical health, and how art actually has the power to heal. The arts and humanities can also inspire innovations in medical devices. For example, the Japanese art of paper folding that we know as origami led to a type of collapsible stent developed by a team at Oxford University. Their stainless steel prototype is a 23-millimeter rounded cube that folds flat to 12 millimeters, and its shape is based on a water bomb base that is the foundation for many origami forms. In 2012, the stent was actually part of an exhibit at the Smithsonian's affiliate museum, the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. A humanistic perspective also inspires us to use technology for the benefit of people's lives. Katie Hall, Chief Technology Officer at a wireless energy startup, saw that their technology could help people with implanted medical devices. With the help of a medical device manufacturer, they designed a heart pump capable of wirelessly recharging. This would eliminate the need for surgical removal and replacement of devices like batteries. Another way in which the humanities can assist research is by helping put science in a moral and historical and ethical context. As you know, unfortunately, many human studies have been performed in the past in circumstances that we now understand to be at odds with evolving ethical standards, such as the notorious incidents in Guatemala at the Willowbrook School in Staten Island and the Tuskegee Institute. The power of integration at heart is really just bringing a new perspective to our endeavors. It is acknowledging that diversity of ideas is the best way to come up with innovative solutions, since real-world problems seldom, if ever, present along narrow disciplinary lines. The challenges we face will require as much creative thinking as we can muster. One public art project has brought attention to the pressing problem of climate change in a very immediate way, and you may have heard of it. The High Waterline Project began in 2007 when artist Yves Mosher drew lines in the streets of Brooklyn and Manhattan with chalk like a baseball groundskeeper. The goal was to show New Yorkers where 100-year floods due to climate change would affect their very neighborhoods. And the effectiveness of the artistic project unfortunately hit home in 2012 when Superstorm Sandy flooded those areas that Mosher had predicted. Today, the project is helping to raise awareness and build resiliency in communities in Philadelphia, Miami, and the UK. The humanities are also being applied to a challenge more prominent this country has seen in decades: vast, vast inequalities in wealth, income, and opportunity. Thanks to Cornell University alumnus Chuck Feeney, the school created recently the Center for the Study of Inequality. As part of his pledge to give away his entire fortune, last June, Feeney pledged $10 million to the center, which looks at this very entrenched problem through a multitude of lenses: economic and social and moral. And Cornell's Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Gretchen Ritter, put the complexity and urgency of the problem into perspective when she noted that inequality is one of the most significant threats to democracy and social inclusion in our lifetime. Philanthropy like this has played and will continue to play a large, large role in these kinds of initiatives to make the economy more fair and to create more opportunities for everyone. It'll be more of a concern in the years ahead, given the fact that the economy is undergoing a really tectonic shift, due mostly to the automation of vast swaths of industry. According to one recent study by PricewaterhouseCoopers, 38% of current jobs in the U.S. are at risk of being automated within the next 15 years. That shift will need to be accompanied by policy from lawmakers to adjust to a new reality and will require nimble changes at our institutions of higher learning. Education must offer pathways to new knowledge and skills for those in the workforce, some of whom are beyond the age of typical college students. But perhaps it will also require shifting some of our curricular focus back to jobs that cannot be replaced by technology, those that rely on the creativity of the human mind and spirit. According to a comprehensive survey by Americans for the Arts generated $135 billion of direct economic activity in 2010 and created more than 4 million full-time jobs. And according to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, nearly 4 million additional jobs were held by people employed in the humanities sector. Clearly, the arts and humanities are not just luxuries. They are major drivers of the economy. The arts and humanities and social sciences also improve our ability to think critically, to analyze, to synthesize, to communicate. New York Times columnist David Brooks wrote, "If the study of the conscious mind highlights the importance of reason and analysis, study of the unconscious mind highlights the importance of passion and perceptions." Mr. Brooks and many others served with me on the American Academy of Arts and Sciences Commission on the Humanities and the Social Sciences. Our report, The Heart of the Matter, recommended 3 major goals for balancing the curriculum in America's great institutions of learning. They are to, 1, educate Americans in the knowledge, skills, and understanding they will need to thrive in a 21st century democracy. 2, foster a society that is innovative, competitive, and strong. And 3, equip the nation for leadership in an interconnected world. Many institutions of higher learning are trying to implement these kinds of programs to give students the broad range of skills they need to adapt and flourish. For another example, at MIT, students must complete at least 8 liberal arts courses and dedicate a quarter of their class time to non-STEM courses. And military academies are some of the biggest proponents of a broad-based education. As Brigadier General Timothy Traynor, West Point's former academic dean, told The Atlantic in 2015, "It's important to develop in young people the ability to think broadly, to operate in the context of other societies, and become agile and adaptive thinkers. The arts and humanities help to create well-rounded citizens that therefore contribute wholly to society." Now, I'm currently on a National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine committee studying the integration of STEM disciplines and the arts and humanities in college and graduate school curricula, as is, I must mention, Tom Ewing, one of your distinguished faculty members as well. We are trying to find out if there is evidence behind the assertion that this kind of integration actually helps students' educational and career outcomes. It certainly seems logical, but is there concrete evidence to support the claims? We're just in the data gathering stage right now and hope to find conclusions soon. In the meantime, while studies are going on, we all stand at a crossroads as a nation, part of an increasingly linked world. Walling ourselves off from other ways of thinking may have once borne minimal costs, but it is now imperative that all people collaborate to come up with more robust solutions. Those solutions invariably will require diversity of thought, diversity of ideas, and diversity of perspectives. We must worry less about categories and more about stimulating the creativity that leads to positive solutions for our most challenging problems. In a 2013 speech, National Endowment of the Humanities Chair Jim Leach summed up our true choice when he said, "Rote thinking is the standard of the status quo. Stimulating the imagination is the key to the future." I think we have a tremendous opportunity in front of us if only we choose to think differently about the challenges we face. When society fully takes advantage of the incredible creativity that infuses pursuits in all areas of endeavor, imagination, inspiration, and innovation will flourish. When that comes to fruition, our uncertain future will be brighter than ever. And I believe that the time is ripe to take a cue from some of humanity's greatest thinkers. Let us champion not just science or medicine, but all spheres of knowledge and wisdom. Let us fully incorporate those insights into all the work that we do. The world and its residents will be better off if we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Skorton, for those comments and insights. I'm sure you'll be happy to have a little discussion and questions.
Yes,
Now, is that okay?
We have plenty of time.
A lot of
for
time.
questions. And
Floor-
we'll go on until you run out of questions or until I can't answer one.
Okay. David, would you mind standing up so the audience could hear your question?
Wonderful talk without slides. You started by saying that it's very important to know one's history. So I wonder if you could elaborate about the history of the Smithsonian Institute.
Thank you. And, by the way, it was a pleasure to meet you today and to find out that another cardiologist has somehow made it in the world. So James Smithson, a British chemist, who never set foot in North America, although Roanoke, decided in the early part of the 19th century that the American experiment. Did you hear the other part of the talk? Yeah. Sorry about that. Can you hear it now? Okay, good. Thank you. James Smithson, a British chemist who never set foot in North America, in the early 19th century became enamored with what people considered the American experiment and decided, even though he never visited here, to leave his fortune to the United States of America. And that fortune turned out to be $500,000 in those days, quite a bit of money, even quite a bit of money today, but especially when you do the math. And the offer came to the United States, and this is going to shock you, but the Congress didn't all agree on something, and they didn't really know whether we should accept the gift. Now, the UK was maybe not our very favored and trusted international partner. They had just burned things down in Washington. A lot of things had happened in 1812. And so there was some debate. Eventually, the debate ended thanks to John Quincy Adams, and the money was accepted. In our wisdom, we took the money and put it in state of Arkansas bonds. Anybody here from Arkansas? Okay, then I can go on with the story. What happened is they quickly defaulted, and all the money was lost. They went back to the U.S. Congress, and after a little more debate, they decided to replenish the money and set up the Smithsonian. James Smithson, in his letter of bequest, said that he wanted the money to go to establish an institution, quote, for the increase and diffusion of knowledge, end quote. Well, that could be a lot of different things. It could be Virginia Tech. It could be something else. They decided to make a museum. And it's interesting about the United States. In many countries, and you've been to many of these countries, the capital of the country has armories or palaces or things like that. In the United States, when the new president walks from the steps of the Capitol to the White House, he or she is surrounded by museums and libraries and archives. So since the days of Smithson, we have decided to emphasize these places of learning and information. And that's what Smithson set up. Now, his remains actually are entombed in the building where my office is. And Charlie Flager, my good friend and one of my heroes in terms of ability to support institutions, I want to tell you, Charlie, we no longer entomb our donors at the Smithsonian. we thank them, we send them a nice handwritten note, but we don't put them on a slab like that. But that's the story of James Smithson and the Smithsonian. It has grown into what it is now. I'll give you the stats. There's 19 museums, the National Zoo, 9 research centers, including a large astrophysics group in partnership with Harvard that operates 2 ground-based telescopes and an orbiting radio telescope, the most prominent tropical research institute in the world in Panama for nearly a century, 216 affiliate museums across the United States, Puerto Rico, and Panama, where people in a community can become an affiliate of the Smithsonian. We can share the collection. We can do things together as partners. And then education programs. And I'll tell you one thing that I didn't know anything about when I took this great opportunity to go there. In addition to informal education that last year 21 million people crossed the museum thresholds to obtain, we also have some curricula developed for the K through 12 space, especially middle school, in the STEM area. And when I heard about that when I first came, I thought, well, I won't be impressed until I know if the teachers of America are downloading these free curricula. because who cares what's on a website unless the teachers are choosing to use it. It's downloaded in every state of the Union and 23 other foreign countries. So James Smithson's almost inexplicable desire to leave his fortune to a fledgling country has turned out to develop an institution, you know, that really is quite broad, and that only had to go down to their 27th candidate to get the latest secretary, so not too bad. So thanks for the question. Questions? Please don't be bashful.
Other questions?
And I do have an active medical license, so if you have personal issues you want to talk about, I'm there for you.
Ubata.
Dr. Skorton, thank you. I'm a graduate student here.
Great.
And I was hoping that you could, what advice do you have for how young scientists could incorporate sort of, rather than learning how to incorporate the arts into their practice, into their research, into their creativity, their thinking, but, you know, as we develop our careers, how we can make it sort of intuitive. You know, it's hard to get scientists, I notice now even, to get involved in things outside of the lab. And so I was wondering what advice you have.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, congratulations on what you're doing, and what a great institution. It's, I must say, before I answer your question about the institution, thanks to Mike, I had a chance to get to know a little bit, a handful of faculty today. And not only the quality of the people, which you know without me telling you, but the esprit, the spirit among those people is palpable. The excitement of this campus is palpable. And I wouldn't tell you that they've already paid for my hotel room. I got no reason to tell you that. At least I hope you have paid for the hotel room. But anyway, congratulations on being here. What department are you in?
It's an interdisciplinary program. I study neuroscience.
Neuroscience. And where are you in your progress?
First year.
First year. Well, take a deep breath, you know. One of these days, you'll be done with it. So, the short answer is, I really don't know. That's the honest short answer. I don't know. We're trying to, Tom Ewing and others and I are trying to figure out if there's evidence to sort of help answer a question like yours in a more intelligent way than I'm answering it now. I'll tell you what some people have done. This is totally anecdotal. And whether it applies to you is your wisdom, not mine. But I'll tell you what some people do. Some people cultivate an avocation, a hobby, in those areas. And I told you a little bit about Ruth Bernstein's work in this area, where the Nobel laureates were more likely to write poetry and so on and so forth. And I have that as a hobby. And so that's one way. Now, that does not immediately or maybe ever bring it into the bosom of your work, like you're referring to. You could take the other end of the spectrum, and one of the things that has been brought up in our committee deliberations is, should there be some sort of mandatory curriculum change? So, for example, would a first-year grad student in neuroscience, grad student, mind you, have to take courses in some other area? And it's too early to tell, not because I'm trying to be coy, but because we're still gathering data and thinking about it as a committee. So I don't know, but that's a second approach. That would be to make a curricular change. And it will take the interest and enthusiasm and support of students, paying tuition, working so hard, and trying to absorb all this information, especially the grad experience is so different, isn't it, than the undergrad experience. Instead of breadth, you have narrowness and depth. As the old joke went, you learn more and more about less and less till pretty soon you know everything about nothing. And that didn't happen to me, of course, because I'm a cardiologist. Cardiologists are sort of a breed apart, I will say that in my day, the study of medicine was simpler because there were fewer organs, body parts. It was a simple day. But that's the second approach, the curricular approach. And the third approach, which has been my experience within the scientific enterprise, is when you run into a problem and you just can't solve it without those other areas of expertise. And probably the one area, and Tom or others may disagree about this. If they do, I wish they'd keep it to themselves. It's my talk. But is the one area that I think is already there is design, field of design. Because design, is it science? Yes. Is it art? Yes. Is it psychology? Yes. Is it, depending on what kind of design? Is it material science? Yes. And so if you happen to be a grad student in some area where what people at Stanford call design thinking occurs, then just by the nature of the way the problems are solved, you will run into those kind of considerations, including artistic ones. So I'm sorry I can't give you a more, a more potent answer to that. Yes, next to you.
If I can just jump in for 1 second before the next question. So I want to add that UBATA actually, its graduate program is called Translational Biology, Medicine, and Health, and one that actually spans a very broad area.
There you go.
That does some of the things that you want. I'm just going to editorialize a little bit. I'm sorry, go ahead. Next.
I'm also a first-year TV and H student, and I started out as an artist, worked as an artist for a decade.
Wow.
And came into this program. So I'm wondering in your answer, if there maybe isn't something that can be brought, rather than bringing scientists to art, if we can't bring more artistic thinking into the lab.
Well,
Some of that has to do with the publication bias, I guess.
yeah, it's really true. In case you didn't hear, the question was, in addition to bringing the scientists to an artistic endeavor, artistic experience, could you bring art into inquiry, if I can put it that way? And it makes sense to me. I'm not trying to be needlessly humble, because you don't get where I get by being needlessly humble. But I just honestly don't know what the right answer is. People like you who come from a discipline that's so disparate to another one are, not impossibly unusual, but pretty unusual. And, medical schools, for example, as we know, in recent years, you were active in the AAMC, I think you still are, have changed and broadened the idea of the pathways that may lead to clinical medicine, and the medical college admission test has been broadened to include what I would say more social sciences than humanities. But still, those are sort of the exceptions that prove the rule. And at the end of the day, an admission committee, especially for undergraduate programs, is looking at this enormous denominator and little tiny numerator of people who can be accepted, and tend to regress toward the mean, so to speak. So, honestly, we need to hand over the baton to you all to change. And I'll make you an offer. My email is skortond, S-K-O-R-T-O-N-D, at SI for SmithsonianInstitution.edu. If you and your colleague want to send me a note about your thinking about integration of education and you're comfortable with it becoming public domain, I'll share it with Tom and the rest of our committee. Everywhere I go that people bring up questions, I tend to do that. And as Tom knows, we've sent a lot of them around the committee. And we would love your insights on this. In fact, as a student thinking about this, your insights would be quite valuable. Would you agree, Tom, to our committee? So skortond at si.edu. And just remember, because it's the National Academies, whatever you send me, I'm going to share with the committee. It's going to be public domain. And we'd love to have your insights. And hopefully I'll have a crisper answer in the not too distant future. Yes, right here.
I don't know if this is helpful at all, but the Roanoke Symphony Orchestra is beginning a program this summer to take the music and work with dementia and Alzheimer's patients. And I don't know if there would be a way to do some sort of collaboration.
It's a fabulous thing. I gave just a handful of examples of things like that in the formal remarks. But, I don't know your own, ma'am, your own point of view or experience in this, but music is able to reduce me to tears, make me laugh, make me giddy, and so on. And so besides the emotional content, the emotional experience, the neuroscientist in the crowd, of which I wish I was, but I'm not, will understand that that means that something's changing. What is it that's changing? A frequency of synaptic firing or some humoral thing, or who knows, My wife's a neuroscientist. I don't get all this stuff. I really don't. I think I tell her all the time, honey, I say, Dave, that when I want to get around her, I call her honey. It doesn't work. But anyway, I always say, boy, neuroscience, that stuff is really deep, And she says, so is the hole you're digging. But anyway, I think that there has to be something in what you're asking because of our own emotional reaction to music and other art forms, visual art forms, as well as performing arts. So it makes sense to me. It does make sense to me. Yes?
I just can't resist making a plug. We just
Please.
started the Center for Communicating Science at Virginia Tech, which is a group of artists.
Fabulous.
Who are bringing the arts practices to your needs. So we have graduate classes and we do workshops. I'm an actor, and I'm the director of the Center for Communicating Science.
So would you send me something, skortond@si.edu, and if you're comfortable, I'll share it with our National Academies Committee, and then you can get a lot of, I don't know, crank mail or something as a result of it. Questions?
David, if I may?
Oh, please. Oh boy, this is going to be a problem.
You raised what I think to be one of the most profound challenges of the future, and it's that 38% number from PricewaterhouseCoopers
Yeah.
of people whose jobs are likely to disappear through a variety of things, including AI, automation, et cetera. With that threat, it seems to me there comes an enormous opportunity. You talk about the arts and the things people can do in these areas. Is it necessarily a bad thing? And what might that free up humankind to do from your perspective, other than find some other skill to make sure they get a job to replace it? What if we end up with a whole bunch of people that aren't working in the kind of usual, day-to-day job that we have now? What will society look like? And how do we turn that into something positive? Because it's going to happen. I think that's for
Yeah,
sure.
what a really, really profound problem, what a really profound question. Again, I wish I had a good, solid answer for it. I'll tell you what I've been thinking. I've been thinking a lot about it, actually. Next week, I'm doing a commencement address at a community college, not too far, Chesapeake Community College. And I've been interested and involved in the world of community colleges in various ways for decades. And part of the reason for that is that people who are way smarter than I am saw this coming way, way back. I mean, now people are saying there's, I forgot the number, 3 or 4 million people who drive for a living, Uber, taxi, long-distance drivers, and that if the self-driving vehicle thing comes to fruition, they're all going to be, added to the unemployment rolls. And that third or fourth thing on your list, that is things we could do besides retraining, we will have to do some retraining. And I won't say this about Virginia Tech because I don't know, but the schools I've been at, UCLA, Northwestern, Cornell, University of Iowa, fabulous research universities, but not nimble in terms of changing curricula like this to help people deal with the need. And I think our great community colleges are more nimble in that regard. So I do hope we gear up with financial support for community colleges and other training programs to give people other skills. But I agree with the sense of your question. No matter what we do, there's going to be jobs lost because of automation. There may be increase in wealth in some quarters, but there'll be jobs lost. And I actually think that I'm venturing very carefully into territory I know almost nothing about, but what the heck. Unless we have some sort of guaranteed income system in the country to tide us over a transition until we reach a new equilibrium, I'm afraid that we're going to have some very severe dislocations. We already have, as I mentioned, a lot of inequalities. And in Washington alone, which is, Washington, D.C. is a boomtown. It really is a boomtown. Gentrifying, a lot of very impressive things happening. I have established a high school advisory group to me, 13 kids, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors in high schools in the district to come and, beat me up and tell me, what should we be thinking about? What are future museum goers going to want to see? Do they want to have technology? Do they want to be in the presence of authentic objects or some combination? And they come from neighborhoods all over the city. And I've learned from them and from things they've told me that people who live a mile and a half as the crow flies from our museums, a lot of them can't get there for economic reasons in the city of Washington. So I hope people start taking your question seriously and working on it. And one of the things that I'm heartened by happening is that people are beginning to talk about this and think about it. And I had a chance to talk with someone, or listen, I should say, to someone, a worker in the Department of Labor just a couple of weeks ago, who was putting a major emphasis on this in this individual's own work, trying to figure out the whole gamut of approaches. But I'm really scared about it. I'm really scared about it. And I think that we already have a lot of problems and tensions in the country. And I'm worried about that adding more fuel to the fire. So thank you. Please.
I'm a family physician and a humanities major, so rather a committed generalist. I perceive a lot of barriers to, despite your examples, perceive a lot of barriers to integrating humanities and science from the loss of individual investigator awards, focusing more on center awards from federal funding agencies and those things. In medical schools, certainly my previous medical school, I'm new here, there was still very much a focus on science disciplines, GPAs, et cetera, and less of an allowance for the humanity majors in the crowd for medical education. How do we get around those barriers? What are the next steps that, as a society, we need to make to be able to overcome those barriers?
Why are you guys asking me such hard questions? I mean, I'm a nice guy, and basically, don't ask Charlie about that, but these are hard questions. I was hoping for questions like, you know, how'd you get to be such an interesting guy, and stuff like this, but
How many planes are in there in space?
something like that, you know, that, yeah, exactly, you know, like, what is it like to stand in front of the Apollo 11 capsule? So you're asking me all these completely questions that are way, way over my head, but I was hoping for pop flies, let's put it that way, not line drives. Here goes a swing at a line drive. So one thing I think we need to do is just be tougher and change some rules and force certain changes in curricula or admission standards. Now, that's easy for me to say. I'm at the other end of the life cycle, but let's say the academic life cycle, I hope the other one's going to still go on for a little bit, but I think that will require some sort of legislative, if I can use that term broadly, sort of a solution. And AAMC, right, try to do that in a way.
The MR5 committee redid the MCATs.
They redid the MCATs, you know. And so that's a legislative approach to it. And I don't see that happening in a lot of disciplines. Plus, the MCAT is one of, it's not unique, but there's a relatively small number of disciplines. There's another factor that'll make it hard to deal with it in terms of curricular legislation. And that's, I have all these great theories and ideas that when I retire, I'm going to write a book called Skorton's Greatest Hits, all the ones that went nowhere, you know. But I think there'll come a time pretty soon, I don't know how soon, where the great graduate schools, professional schools, and employers will take people without bachelor's degrees. That there will be online learning of various kinds. There'll be some sort of measure of competency. It's anathema to people like me to think about that, but I believe it will happen because of the price of college, because of all the things that are pushing us into a funnel. And I believe it eventually happen. That'll make it harder to do these things by legislation, because I think when that day comes, I really believe it will come, there won't be that sort of final common pathway of getting there. But right now, I think legislation is one thing. Another thing would be for the great public affairs professionals in our great schools, like Tracy Vosberg and her colleagues here, who I had the great pleasure of working with at Cornell, before she joined the Stampede, like Flager and all these people coming to Virginia Tech, which now I understand. To get the story out within an institution, just deal with it as an internal feedback mechanism about people who have succeeded brilliantly with these kinds of backgrounds, because that'll do two things. It'll be heartening to people who are thinking about doing that themselves, and maybe cause the faculty and the administrators in every institution to rethink the narrowness of some of the choices that we make. Having said that, though, I think I swung and missed on that pitch, because you still have to deal with, I'm sure you have an overwhelming number of applications to go to medical school here, and so, what are you going to do? You have to depend on some sort of metrics of some kind, and it's tough, but I think unless we do something like I mentioned, it's going to be hard. Now, those are push things. The pull thing would be if the great employers of America began to show that they would hire people based on a final skill set and didn't care at all what their backgrounds were. And I think that's happening to some degree, depending on the discipline and sort of employment opportunity that we're talking about. One of Tom's and my colleagues on that committee is Norm Augustine, who was the Assistant Secretary of the Army and all kinds of things, and CEO of Lockheed Martin, actually oversaw the merger of Martin Marietta and Lockheed into that. A great scientific leader in the country who's on our committee and speaks very eloquently and writes very eloquently about the fact that when he was hiring people in a tech discipline, one of the ultimate tech disciplines, Lockheed Martin, he really wanted to think about people who knew how to think broadly, communicate, all these kinds of so-called soft skills that end up being the most important skills. And then finally, I would say that you yourself are a great example that you can have a very complex career. I can't imagine a thing more complex than general practice. I used to run a general med division years ago, and I retreated from it because it was very, very hard to keep up in the breadth that you have to do to deal with an undifferentiated incoming patient, that you're a good example of how you can come from that kind of discipline to one that's very demanding of information retrieval and use. And so you could be like a hero to those following you. But Tracy and others have to get those stories out there, because the stories that we tend to do, and it's nobody's fault and no surprise, tend to be tech-oriented stories. Someone has a new way of understanding brain function. Because I'm here, I'll say this about functional MRI. It's cool, it's tech, it's science, it's unbelievably necessary. But we could also put some stories out about these other things and just push it a little bit and help, give people some good news to read about, which, we could all use more good news, right?
I think in light of the time, we'll probably have to call it and thank Dr.
One more question.
All right, one more question.
I mean, you always
pick
say
it.
one more question. One more little
You
question.
pick the person you want to ask the last question.
Let's see. No, wait a minute. Do not raise your hands unless this is a pop fly. Do not do one of these things like, because I'm going to get nuts if you, is it a pop fly?
It's easy.
All right, great. Ask away. Ask 10.
Curious how you transitioned from academic medicine into this new role and what your to-do list is on a daily basis.
Holy moly. Well, how I transitioned was just luck, for real. I started when I was at the University of Iowa. I had an appointment in engineering because I did work in image processing, and an appointment in medicine. They were looking for someone to run the research office who had one leg in the medical campus, the non-medical campus, and so I became a bureaucrat, proud to use that term with a capital B, and I enjoyed doing administration, so one thing led to another. How I got from being a college president to where I am now was just dumb luck, because a headhunter called me and said, we'd like you to look at the Smithsonian job. And I knew the headhunter, and I basically said, sister, you got the wrong mail merge. And she said, no, we don't have the wrong mail merge. But I said, I don't know anything about museums, never worked in a museum. They said, we have plenty of people who work in museums. We're looking for someone who's comfortable working in a decentralized environment where nobody thinks they work for you. And I said, that's me. And so that's it. My to-do list every day is complex. I spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill, and as Mike will attest, answering calls from some of our elected representatives. So I do some work on Capitol Hill in that regard. I try to steal time. I don't do it every day. I wish I did. But I try to steal time to walk around the museums adjacent to my office, to just talk with and listen to the visitors, the tourists. I promise I'll leave soon. I got to tell you a great vignette. I'm walking in the sculpture garden of the Hirshhorn Museum. It's called the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, HMSG. And I just was there. It was the summer of my first year, and I was really proud of myself. And I'm walking around, and there was this gorgeous little family, looked like out of a Norman Rockwell painting. And I said, I'm David Skorton. I'm the secretary of the Smithsonian. And the father, much to my chagrin, says, oh, so you're the guy in charge? And my heart sank, And I said, well, not exactly, The chancellor, the person I really report to, is the Chief Justice, John Roberts. He said, yeah, well, I got to talk to you about something. He pointed to a sculpture, a big, huge sculpture. He said, how much does that weigh? I said, I have no idea. And so I just said, I don't know, a half a ton, let's say. And he said, half a ton. How about my kid here? How much does she weigh? This really happened. And I took care of young people. Pretty good. I said 50 pounds. I said 43 pounds. My daughter weighs 43 pounds. So tell me, why is it that my 43-pound daughter cannot climb on that? Why does the sign say, do not hurt the sculptures? What's she going to do to a 1,000-pound sculpture? And I said, I got to go now, sort of thing. But I do try to spend some time listening to visitors. Once in a while, I wish it was more often, I work at an information station. That's a very daunting experience. We operate a lot on volunteers. We have 6,500 employees. We have 12,000 volunteers, 6,000 in person and 6,000 digital volunteers. But I try to spend some time with the visitors. I spend some time getting out to the various parts of the Smithsonian that I can and meeting with the employees in town hall meetings and stuff like that. I spend some time meeting with the people, you know, who directly report to me and so on. And I try to spend some time, with this high school group, understanding what they want. And then I'm still spending some time on a learning curve about the world of museums and museum studies, because, you know, I'm arguably the top museum bureaucrat in the country, and I really come from completely a different world. So those are all the things that I care to share in public that I do. But otherwise, it's a very similar job to being college president. I miss the undergrads a lot. I really miss the undergrads. They're a lot of fun when they're sitting in your office yelling at you, but otherwise they're a lot of fun. And I do have, instead of faculty, I have curators, scientists, anthropologists, botanists, and so on. And they're really a joy to work with. So there's an answer. Thank you so much for all the stuff you're doing. Thanks for coming today.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Skorton.